What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Danny and Bush coming at you today with our top 12 Dynasty running back rankings. Continuing last week's series, we started with quarterbacks and wide receivers. If you want to check those out, talk about the running back draft strategy, what we're doing and handling this position. Then, of course, going through our top 12 Dynasty running backs as well. If you guys enjoy content like this, leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And if you want access to all of our rankings, our Dynasty Rankings Manifesto 2.0 is live on our Patreon. That'll get you access to quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, get you access to bucketed rankings by age, get you access to our 2023 rookie rankings so far as well. Top 200s for one quarterback in Superflex 2024, 2025, 2026 rankings will be coming soon for the Devy Rankings Manifesto, which will also be available on our Patreon as well. So if that interests you, go check it out. Link down below in the description, in the pinned comment, everywhere over there. But before we get into it, Danny, how you doing?
Doing well. And as you guys know, this is how it's going to look in January, because come April, come May, there's going to be a new number one on this list, potentially a couple other additions on this list, which is why, for the most part, again, we will go into strategy. But a lot of these guys we're going to name today aren't going to be on a lot of our teams because we've positioned ourselves to add all these oncoming rookies in oncoming years. So, yeah, I'm ready to roll. Again, prefer talking about wide receivers, prefer talking about quarterbacks, but I guess you got to give you guys running back content as well.
Yeah, for sure. We're going to have to break this position down at some point, as much as we don't like to talk about it. So as always, before we get into the video, let's hit the intro. Okay, so Danny kind of alluded to it before the video or before the intro, but our running back strategy, it's one of the toughest positions to handle in Dynasty because it's the most volatile, it has the least shelf life, it's the most injury prone, and players' values can sometimes flip on their heads seemingly overnight. Like we saw during the season throughout the year that guys like Kenneth Walker and Travis Etienne took these like meteoric rises after a couple good games, and vice versa. We saw guys, like Dalvin Cook and Alvin Kamara take these meteoric falls based on, some poor play and some injuries and stuff like that. And for this reason, we believe here, at FSE that it's most important to build out the rest of your team before your winning window is set. Multiple stud quarterbacks potentially in Superflex leagues, a stable of stud young wide receivers, a tight end or two that's kind of worth a damn. And then you build out your running back core, whether that's, you go after these high-priced rookies in these rookie drafts that we're going to be having coming up at the end of April and early May, or you go after some, cheaper options like your James Connors, Leonard Fournettes, Cordero Pattersons, Jeff Wilsons, Jerick McKinnons, whoever it ends up being, and you build out your teams that way. That's how we build out our teams because, it's not very sustainable to have a team of, 4 or 5 great Dynasty running backs being weak at quarterback, weak at wide receiver, weak at tight end, because you just leave yourself so much, room for disappointment over the course of a season with that position.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you try to build your team long-term about the running back position, I mean, let's just contextualize this for a second. An elite running back, their shelf life, like you said, is only maybe, 4 to 6 years. At the wide receiver and the quarterback position, you're getting 8, 10 plus years. And not only that, we're not just talking about the production. We're talking about the volatility in the market, because when a running back reaches, year 3, year 4 in the league, we see their market value drop dramatically. And we talked about it on the Dynasty buys and sells video, but a lot of those sells were guys that are aged, 25, 26, 27 years old. Why is that? Because if they have any type of, subpar year, take it as an Austin Ekeler we're going to be talking about later in this video. If you were to go from the RB1 this year and next year he was only like, let's say the running back 6 in points per game, his market value would nearly half.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so many factors to take into account, right? Because like you said, ideally in an elite situation, a running back might have 4 to 6 years of fantasy relevance, but there's maybe only 5 or 6 running backs across the entire league that have 4 to 6 years of relevance. The important thing to note is that, these back end RB2s, mid RB2s, high end RB2s, they maybe only have 1 to 3 years of high end fantasy relevance. And also we know that in real life, NFL teams aren't likely to pay this position. So situations change, year over year. And very quickly, you can go from a running back in a great situation to a running back in a suboptimal situation as well. It's simply too volatile to build a dynasty roster on a stable of 4 or 5 elite running backs. The strategy we usually employ as a result is to build up the shell of these elite teams with quarterbacks, wide receivers, tight ends, collect draft capital, and then draft your running back core to align yourself with whatever your winning window ends up being. So if you're drafting the shell of your productive struggle right now, and you have, let's say 2 elite quarterbacks, 3 elite wide receivers, 1 elite tight end, but you're lacking depth, maybe you're a year away. You spend all your rookie picks this year mostly on wide receivers. Maybe you draft a cheaper running back here and there, and then come 2024, maybe you're ready to compete while those running backs are on their rookie contract. Or if you don't want to spend up in the rookie draft, you go cheap. You go grab guys like Cordero Patterson's of years past, Jeff Wilson's this year, Jerick McKinnon's this year, and
James
you can
Conner.
win kind of zero RB strategies where the rest of your team is very strong and you just have cheap production at the running back position.
Yeah, the way I describe the running back position, and you've heard me coin this term multiple times, but you want to build your running back core through opportunity cost, right? Because you're going to have the elites at your quarterback, your wide receiver, potentially a tight end. Maybe, you got a Kyle Pitts, a George Kittle type, let's say hypothetically, right? Then at that point, the opportunity cost of adding an elite running back in the draft is much less than taking them in the startup. And at the same part, getting that elite running back production from an older player for like a second or, early third round projected pick is going to be much more valuable than, again, taking them in the startup. So for your sake, you've already built an elite roster, an elite dynasty team. Now you're just adding little bits and pieces around the core that you built for yourself.
Yeah, and especially this year when we're going to have a lot of second-round rookie picks go to the running back position because it's a deep running back class. This is why we talked about last offseason, 2 off seasons ago, that we were aligning our winning windows is, build that core of those teams. And then this draft class and next draft class specifically are very rich at that position in talent. You're going to get solid, starters, RB2 types or better in the second round of your rookie drafts consistently. So let's get into the running backs themselves. We don't need to spend too much time on each player because, again, I would say overall, more so than any other position in Dynasty right now, there's very little consensus at this position. There's a lot of warts with each of these guys, starting at RB1 of all positions. Like you can go to QB1 at quarterback. There's very little warts with Josh Allen. There's very little warts with Patrick Mahomes and some of those guys. And same goes for, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase at wide receiver. With this position, there's very little consensus, and we have problems right off the bat, even with the best running back in Dynasty in our rankings, in Jonathan Taylor, who is currently RB1 of the young running backs bucket. I'm not really going to waste any time telling you how good he is. I'm sure you guys know he was RB1 in fantasy in 2022, finishes a top 12 running back as a rookie. Still in spurts was very good this year, but these seasons can happen at running back, right? When you're banged up, when your offense struggles, when your offensive line underperforms, you have QB situations, your coach gets fired midway through the year. This happens at running back. When you understand that this is still a 24-year-old running back in Jonathan Taylor with multiple top 12 seasons, who still played like a guy in spurts who can be an RB1 or a top-end running back, it makes it easy to understand why we're still bullish on him and the market has cooled a little bit. But this is the thing with running backs, right? The market value can fluctuate depending on how they perform over a given year if they're banged up, which we know at this position it's very likely to happen. We have a probable rookie quarterback coming into this situation. And if they hit on that pick, whether it's CJ Stroud, Will Levis, who everybody's attaching them to, maybe they trade up for a Bryce Young or something like that, Jonathan Taylor will likely get a long-term extension because I would say more so than most other running backs across the NFL, if I had to put money down on a guy to get a long-term extension at the running back position who's young right now on a rookie contract, Jonathan Taylor would probably be the most likely, if not one of the most likely guys to get that. And then he's maybe tethered to an exciting young offense for his 3 to 4 year window that a player of his caliber should have. Like you said at the beginning of the video, 4 to 6 years for these elite running backs. I think Jonathan Taylor definitely qualifies as one of those elite running backs. We still should have, a couple more years of great Jonathan Taylor production, but even him, he's got warts.
Yeah, no, absolutely. With Jonathan Taylor, we know what the bull case is when he's healthy. Also, not to mention, I feel like an underrated part is that we went into the last year going into drafts with the understanding that this would be an elite offensive line. This would be, maybe a team that can contend for a playoff spot. Now we kind of realize that the offensive line regressed. We're going to get a new quarterback, turnover at the quarterback position, and we're not necessarily certain exactly where the Colts are going to be going into the 2023 season. So there's a lot more risk, but as we do know, workload, explosive ability, underrated receiving ability, which we've seen this past year and the year prior. Like, yeah, if Jonathan Taylor is healthy, he's probably a shoo-in to be a top 3 to 4 running back in 2023 at the age of 23 years old.
Yeah, exactly. He just turned 24, so he's just, starting to climb the mountain there in age, but he's still got a couple years left. And again, Bijan Robinson is in theory our RB1. Like he would be our RB1 right now, but we're just ranking current NFL running backs. And I'm sure, like Danny mentioned at the beginning of the video, there's going to be more than just one rookie running back that rounds out our top 12 because there is warts with a lot of these guys. And RB2 and Travis Etienne, who's RB2 of the young running backs bucket, there's zero argument that you can make to say Travis Etienne's the second best running back in Dynasty from like a talent perspective. But with these young running backs, they're so dependent on surrounding factors. And Etienne does check a lot of boxes, which is why I feel good about him near the top of my rankings, because he was a great prospect. He was drafted in the first round. He finished as an RB2 in his first season as a starter. He's now tethered potentially to an elite ascending offense with Trevor Lawrence, with Calvin Ridley, with Christian Kirk, with potentially even more if they add another receiver or something like that. I think the floor for Etienne is similar to what we saw from Miles Sanders with the Eagles this year. Hopefully the targets increase, because that was a big selling point for us coming into the season. We didn't necessarily see that, but we still have a young 24-year-old running back, to me, in one of the better situations a running back can be in, because he's a good bet for production, good bet for value insulation, given his age, given his profile, given the situation that he's in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. When it comes to Travis Etienne, it's kind of weird in terms of his deployment this year. We expected him to, maybe be a DeAndre Swift role where, maybe he was getting 9, 10, carries a game. He was getting 8 targets a game, something like that. That's how we thought he was going to be used. Instead, they were using him as like a pure between the tackles runner, couple targets a game. But like, it was like Jonathan Taylor type of usage, in the sense that they didn't really use him in space. They didn't really use him, out of the backfield. They basically just said, we're going to give you the ball behind the line of scrimmage, go make a man miss, and go try to hit the home run. That's basically how Travis Etienne was functioning this year. He got a ton of volume once they were able to trade James Robinson. We were legitimately looking at a guy getting, 18, 20 carries per game. So if you're getting that type of volume in this type of ascending offense, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. Trevor Lawrence, Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk. We expect this team to probably be in that, top 5 to 10 range of scoring, especially for the next couple years. Like, you have that insulation with Etienne. And if he ever has a year where he's like the RB4 in points per game, his market value is going up tremendously.
He's almost like the new Joe Mixon, kind of, right? Like a guy that we expected to have a better receiving profile that's not getting the receiving work. Guy who should get most of his value from, touchdowns and the fact that he plays in a good offense. And unlike Mixon, actually probably has a little bit more home run ability as well. So definitely, a solid guy, but again, not a guy that I'm like pounding the table for in the early second round of a startup draft. He's still a guy that I probably will let my league mates draft and draft, quarterbacks, wide receivers, and potentially a tight end or two instead of a guy like Travis Etienne. The next guy is RB3 for us, Kenneth Walker, who was a rookie this past year, RB3 of the young running backs bucket, still very, very young, just 22 years old. And he showed why he can be a great running back in spurts this year, but he wasn't consistently dominant all season. We saw some great games out of Kenneth Walker, but we didn't see him consistently churn out 100-yard games or, 20-plus fantasy point type of games, even though he was like a top 12 running back in juke rate, led the league among rookies, I believe, in rushing yards this year, finished as a top 16 running back in fantasy. But like the rest of these top guys, he has warts going back to his collegiate profile. He only had 35 targets this year. I don't expect him to ever be a superstar in the receiving game, but it was encouraging to know that he's at least capable. I don't know. Maybe you guys don't feel this way about Kenneth Walker or the top of the running back board in general, but I'm still not really that excited to draft Kenneth Walker. I think if you drafted him 105 in a rookie draft, you're excited about now where he's at in terms of a value perspective. But if we're doing these rankings basically on the premise of like, you're going into a startup, and I'm not super, super excited hitting the draft button on Kenneth Walker in a startup, because, even if Geno's back, was that lightning in the bottle? Is he going to continually be a great quarterback going forward? Or is this a long-term thing where they maybe draft a quarterback instead? There's a lot up in the air with Kenneth Walker, and I'm not certain that this guy's, such a high level of talent that he's going to transcend everything around him.
He's Travis Etienne, but in a worse situation. That's basically the easiest way to describe it. He's a really, really good runner. And like you said, top 12 juke rate, top 16 running back as a rookie. Rashad Penny obviously expected to be departing from the team, an unrestricted free agent this year. Once he went down, Kenneth Walker truly, truly took on a workhorse role. But like you said, the Seahawks offense basically hit the nuts this year. Geno Smith played like a top 10 quarterback. They were scoring at a rate that nobody expected them to going into the year. Like, what if Geno regresses? Or what if they draft a quarterback at 4 or 5, wherever they're picking, and he's not quite ready? Like, there's a lot more risk in terms of this offense. And like you said, Kenneth Walker isn't this elite receiver that can perform in fantasy in spite of a bad offense. If he was getting, 5, 6 targets a game, and you could basically, just force feed him in the receiving game, and he's going to give you some PPR in that aspect. Sure, he's a lot more insulated to the offensive success in that point. But because he doesn't offer you that, you have to hope that this is an above average to potentially top 10 level offense, which is very, very risky projecting coming into the season.
Yeah, there's reasons for optimism. They had 2 rookie offensive tackles this year. It was Geno's real first year as a starter. But again, he kind of did hit lightning in a bottle. It's possible that he regresses. We saw him kind of tail off as the season went along from the early season form that we saw from him. This is the reason why we don't have any rookie pick value assigned to these running backs, right? If you go to our Dynasty Rankings Manifesto 2.0, you're going to see quarterbacks with, 4 first rounders, 3 first rounders, 2+ first rounders, wide receivers like Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, 2+, 3 potentially first rounders to acquire these guys. The highest pick value in rookie drafts that we have assigned is to Jonathan Taylor with 1 first rounder plus his listed price. Like, we're not talking about running backs commanding 2-3 first rounders in trade. So if you can get that kind of price tag for any of these running backs, absolutely sell them. The only guy that I'm comfortable selling 2 first rounders for is 101 Bijan Robinson. He's the only running back at this position that I'm willing to do that for.
Yeah, no, a lot of volatility otherwise compared to Bijan Robinson versus the rest. But transitioning the next running back off the board, and the one that would be right there neck and neck with Bijan had he not torn his ACL last year, Breece Hall of the New York Jets. Obviously, like I said, he suffered that season-ending injury, week 6, week 7 against the Broncos this year. And we saw prior to that he was really, really ready to ascend, ready to be this league-winning level running back. Receiving game, home run ability. I mean, he looked like Saquon Barkley, like the way he was playing. Unfortunately, of course, ACL tear. However, the nice thing is that it was a very, very clean tear. It's not a lot of, structural damage like J.K. Dobbins or potentially Javonte Williams will face. Basically, with Breece Hall's tear, it was a very, very clean tear. So projecting forward, that's a nice thing. However, like you kind of said, this is going into year 2 now. He's going into year 2. He's going to be hobbled. We don't necessarily know how exactly he's going to be performing coming off that ACL tear. Given the volatility of the situation, again, you can argue him up to RB2, I think, but the market currently values him ahead of Jonathan Taylor. And my advice right now is if you're rostering this level of high value running back, you may as well get the one that's going to provide elite production from day 1 next year, which Jonathan Taylor can do, and Breece Hall will not be able to do. So in terms of transition, again, I talked about on the Dynasty buys and sells video, but if your league mates are valuing Breece Hall as their running back 1 overall in Dynasty, I feel like that's a very easy spot to flip.
It's almost very similar to what I talked about with J.K. Dobbins last year, because J.K. Dobbins last year, you guys know I put out a video titled buy this running back right now in Dynasty. And I think that was good advice inherently, but it was the wrong timing, right? I said to buy him in June, July, before we knew really anything about his ACL reconstructive surgery. I think the time to buy J.K. Dobbins was, September, October, when we saw him struggle to come back from the injury. And I think that's the similar, thing that we're going to face with Breece Hall. And I know, Dobbins' injury was a little bit more severe because he had structural damage and stuff like that. But Breece Hall is probably not going to start the season looking like the way he did his rookie year. And if that happens, he has the chance to fall down from, the Dynasty RB1 or RB2 or RB3, where he's, primarily valued right now, to potentially the RB15 in Dynasty or something like that. Even as good as his prospect profile was, we've seen it with Saquon Barkley. He fell down big time from an injury-prone, 3rd season in the NFL or 4th season in the NFL. He's young. He's talented. He's a great trade target for rebuilding teams. But the issue is you can't buy him until you see him start to lose some value, because he's already valued way, way too high with the injury risk that he presents.
Yeah, I mean, we did see that with Saquon Barkley, where at least, his value, held itself to a certain degree, but narratives were formed against him every year to the point where, I mean, he was a guy who was going in the 4th, 5th round of startups this past season, despite only being 24 years old entering the year. So yeah, I mean, there is risk with Breece Hall. Obviously, he's such an elite player, showed it off in the first 6 games, but like you said, this is not the time to buy Breece Hall, because we want to know as much information as possible, and we want them to be way closer to the timeline of performing if we're buying any single running back in. If he starts out slow to start the year and you see potentially, maybe his market value is only 90-95% of what you would have had to pay now, it was worth it because you got more information by the time you're ready to make that decision.
Yeah, and that kind of transitions right into Saquon Barkley, because I with Breece Hall, you can kind of compare him to Saquon, being that he was, this great prospect and people love the profile. But even a guy as bulletproof as Saquon Barkley was able to lose value from an ACL tear, not looking like the same guy, getting that injury prone label, whether it was warranted or not. It happened and it affected his value. And Breece Hall is the same situation. Saquon Barkley is now, we're seeing the inverse side of the coin, who for me is the RB1 of the win now running backs bucket, 2 years removed from the ACL tear. We saw him post a top 5 season this past year, even though everybody said he was washed, said he couldn't stay healthy. In a win now window, you get a couple years of elite Saquon Barkley production, assuming he doesn't, get injured, which is definitely still a risk with him. And given his profile, he might give you a little bit more than that because, of all the running backs that we're going to expect to give you potentially production into their, late 20s or something, Saquon Barkley would be the type of guy that could potentially do it. He's just 26 years old, doesn't have a ton of run under his belt right now. I expect the Giants to re-sign Saquon Barkley to a long-term extension this offseason. If they don't, he'll probably get franchise tagged or something like that. I think it's great for him to stay in New York because I think Daboll's a good coach who knows how to use him and keep him healthy. Once they get some receivers, maybe this offense improves even more so than it did in the step that it took this year. And if Daniel Jones sticks around, I don't think it affects Saquon Barkley all that much because I think Daniel Jones is a good enough quarterback that Saquon can be a great fantasy running back if DJ is the quarterback there. And I think he'll probably get at least a franchise tag, if not a small extension this year.
Yeah, Saquon Barkley's fine, like if you're trying to win now, but like you kind of said, a lot of volatility with these older guys in terms of their market value, if anything was to happen on the downside risk perspective.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is these RB1 and 2 of our win now bucket, and I'll transition into the next guy, which is Christian McCaffrey. They have the injury prone label still in people's minds. So if they do get injured again, then people are going to go right back to that, default setting. They can't stay healthy, even though they both just proved it this year, which we were kind of talking about heading into the season. But Christian McCaffrey in a 1 to 2 year window, if you're drafting a guy, there's probably none that you take over Christian McCaffrey at running back. Christian McCaffrey is in an elite offense. He's going to be 27 at kickoff next year, which is a little sketchy. He has over 1,000 career touches. He's definitely going to lose value, but if you get, elite production out of him, that's probably why you drafted the guy. The issue for me and for both of us in a startup, if you're trying to draft Christian McCaffrey, he immediately pigeonholes you into winning now, right? Because you got a 27-year-old running back, like I said, over 1,000 career touches. Yeah, he's going to help you big time, but you can't make that decision until you know what the rest of your roster is going to look like. Unfortunately, Christian McCaffrey goes so high in startups to the point that he might be your second, your third round pick, and you might not know how the draft is going to play out quite yet. I would rather get a Christian McCaffrey type in round 4, round 5, when I know maybe Austin Ekeler is the type of guy that goes around that range, where I know, who in my league is trying to compete, who in my league is trying to rebuild. If I'm in a very rebuild heavy, room, then maybe it makes sense to go win now, and vice versa. If I'm in a very, competitive type of room, then it probably makes sense to go rebuild wise. And for me, Christian McCaffrey is just not a guy that I'm going to see myself pressing draft on in a startup because I don't have enough information by the time you have to pick him.
Yeah, no, well, I'll tell you right now, probably not too many of these running backs we're even talking about today are guys I'm going to be willing to put the button on in terms of startups. It's just, man, with the running back classes that are coming up in the next couple years, I just don't really want to touch these guys. But that point aside, you guys already know our framework in terms of how we attack this position. Christian McCaffrey is probably the least likely person we're going to hit in a startup because that's the nature of the position. We know as soon as you draft him in the 2-3 turn or third round area, that this time next year, we'd be lucky if he's going in the 5th round of drafts.
Yeah, he's like a luxury car. He loses 50% of his value when you drive him off the lot, pretty much. So definitely not an ideal player to draft. But again, if you have him and you're in a competitive window, by all means, hold on to him, try and win again next year. For example, my Tone Setters team, I have him on that team, and I'm still in a competitive window, so I'm still going to try and win. But again, we're talking, base dynasty running back rankings from a startup. It's pretty difficult for me to hit the draft button when I would draft, 6, 7, 8, 9 wide receivers, 12 quarterbacks or something before I drafted Christian McCaffrey, a couple tight ends as well. This next, tier, I would say, of running backs is really difficult, man. And I'm expecting a lot of these rookies to kind of work their way into this area because there's a lot of question marks we have about these dudes. And the first one is DeAndre Swift, who's our consensus RB7. He's RB5 of our young running backs bucket. I would love to just punish DeAndre Swift for being a pretty sizable bust in fantasy this year. But the truth is it's honestly tough to say that he's not still really valuable in Dynasty. He's 24 years old, a part of an ascending offense, an offense that showed quite a bit this year. Hopefully has better injury luck next year than he did this year because, people forget this dude literally got hurt in week 1 and was dealing with it all season. But that's part of the problem with DeAndre Swift. Like the Lions coaching staff, rightfully in real football terms, recognize that they can't overwork this guy because he wasn't healthy this year. And I think he's still going to be heavily involved in the receiving work and all that kind of stuff. But given what he's shown over the first couple of years of his career, he's been banged up. They're probably not going to just suddenly give this guy 80% of the work because he can't handle it. He can't stay healthy. And I think that's going to mean Jamal Williams is heavily involved on the goal line. He's going to be a pest. It's going to take, a lot for me to trade for DeAndre Swift, because I just think there's so much risk around him. At a certain point, coaching staffs will just not give you a full workload, and they're going to continue to spell the guy. It's probably like a low end RB1, mid RB1 absolute ceiling range of outcomes for DeAndre Swift, which was not the same thing that we were saying this time last year. We thought he had, potential legendary upside, where now it's more like he's a young version of Aaron Jones.
Yeah, no, absolutely. His range of outcomes has been really capped, because, what about this coaching staff has really pointed to the fact that it wouldn't be capped? Like, genuinely, like, he's going to get his targets. He's probably not going to get over, 10 to 12 carries a game. That is the Aaron Jones workload. That is what we're hoping for. I don't think he has 20 plus PPR point per game upside. Can he hit, maybe 17 and a half, 18 on a very good season? Sure. And maybe, next year with the Lions being how potent of an offense they are projecting forward, you could potentially make the case that him healthy is going to be able to get him those RB1 totals. But like you said, there's a lot of risk. There's a lot of ambiguity. It really seems like somebody on the market that is going to go down tremendously in price if he has an underwhelming start, because people are already negative on him. So he's not a guy I'm drafting in startups. If you, maybe want to trade for him going into the year because he's super, super cheap, because, say somebody has just had enough and they want to sell him for the 110 and you want to, take a chance on him there. Sure. But he's not somebody I'm taking, in the fourth round of a startup. He's not somebody I'm taking, for a mid first or later value. Like, if I'm acquiring him, it needs to be for a back end 2023 first for me to consider it.
Yeah, exactly. His value's gone down big time, because you probably could have gotten 2-1s for him this time last year. And, a banged up season happens at running back, which is kind of the thing I talked about with Jonathan Taylor at the beginning of the video. But with Swift, he doesn't have the track record that Jonathan Taylor has. So it's harder to say that he's 100% just going to get some huge workload, because we really haven't seen it outside of a couple game stretches here and there. Another guy who unfortunately finds himself banned all the way down here at RB8. He should have been the consensus, probably RB2, RB3 at lowest in Dynasty right now, had he not gotten injured. But Javonte Williams, RB6 of the young running backs bucket, he's pretty much just on track for the J.K. Dobbins treatment, right? Second year in the NFL, he tears his ACL, compound ACL tear on a contact play. It's going to take him like 16 months to come back. And we're talking about a guy who's going to be entering his third season, probably losing most of his third season, and come his fourth NFL season is actually ready to take on a big workload. And again, similar to what I said with DeAndre Swift, it's not really fair. It's unfortunate, but is the coaching staff going to suddenly trust this guy with a huge workload if his first 3 years in the NFL, he wasn't able to handle a huge workload? Year one, because of Melvin Gordon. Year two, he gets the ACL tear. Next year, probably doesn't get a huge workload either. It's unfortunate. We have a guy just like Breece Hall who could have been this great running back asset had he not gotten injured. And in an ideal world, year three is the big step for him to take a huge step forward. This year, had he not gotten injured, he probably takes over that workload. And even though the Broncos were a bad team, he probably at least is getting great usage. But we didn't really see any of that because he was kind of robbed of it. So now we have a running back who has potentially a questionable workload coming off of a major injury in an offense that was one of the worst in the league this year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it was funny because you saw that first game against Seattle where he had 14 targets. Like, this guy was legitimately used as an elite receiver out of that backfield. And down the stretch, of course, as soon as Javonte gets hurt, that's when the team starts having distaste towards Melvin Gordon. Like, seriously, like we were battling all offseason, even last year, all offseason. Oh, Javonte Williams, he's going to be hamstrung by Melvin Gordon. Nah, he got hamstrung by his knee giving out on him because Melvin Gordon was absolute fucking dust. Like, in all reality here, if Javonte Williams stayed healthy, I have no problem saying that he would have been a top 5 running back last year. But obviously the downside, needs that knee cleaned up. A little bit, grosser of a tear. I don't even know if grosser is the right word, but a little more, uneven of a tear than, a guy like Breece Hall's tear was. So there's a lot more risk, a lot more downside risk here. However, I don't think he has the current market value that a guy like Breece Hall would have. So if you can, trade him, hypothetically, we mentioned DeAndre Swift. If you want to send, a late first to get DeAndre Swift, if you want to send like the 111 and somebody's worried about Javonte Williams and you want to take a chance on him there, I don't mind it because, again, this is still a young running back. If he, were to come back from that injury and ascend to the level that we think he can, Like, there's no stopping him from potentially being a top 4 type of running back in these rankings. But for right now, there's a lot of question marks. Again, not for the faint of heart, but if you want to take the chance on him potentially increasing in value, I don't think it's a bad opportunity to do this year.
I do. Again, back to the J.K. Dobbins point. Let me get Javonte Williams for a mid 2024 second in week 7 this year rather than buy him now. I would just rather.
I didn't mean, sorry, let me add to that. I didn't mean it right now. I meant in season. I meant it like come week 2, week 3, week 4, like we were mentioning with Breece Hall. So sorry, like if that was misconstrued, in season is when I would want to do it.
Right, because we saw a guy like J.K. Dobbins
Yeah.
go from consensus, top 12 dynasty running back entering the season, even knowing that he had this ACL tear coming up, to a guy that literally plummeted to like the mid-20s of the running back position.
Yeah.
I think that's possible for Javonte Williams.
It's fair.
Which is why I'd be scared if I'm holding him right now and I maybe want to see what I can get, maybe buy him at a later date. It's kind of the same situation as Breece Hall. So unfortunately, we got these guys go down with injuries. I wish they didn't, but they did. And we have to kind of deal with the repercussions of it. Unless you have anything else to add, we can probably move on to the next guy.
No, the only thing I'll quickly add here is the risk reward here. I think is worth it if you can do it at the right time. And that's something, again, when I was saying earlier, like, yeah, the elite upside is clearly there and I'm willing to buy for the right price. But like you kind of said, you have to time it accordingly. You can't just be buying in, May, June, July, August. Like if you're buying Javonte Williams, you're probably going to be doing it by week 3, week 4 of the NFL season. And even if you have to, pay at that point, say he looks like himself, even if you have to pay a little bit of a tax on that, I'm fine doing that, because if I'm buying a running back to begin with, I'm expecting the elite production. I'm not here to take risks. I'm here to win championships if I'm buying running backs.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of winning championships, the guy that probably helped a lot of people this year was Josh Jacobs, who's RB9 for us, RB3 of the win now bucket. There's a lot of risk with Josh Jacobs because he is starting to come into like a free agent period, right? We don't know if he's going to be back with the Raiders. They declined his option, but they just used the living bejesus out of the guy this year.
Yeah, no, it was pretty insane. We talked about it, 400 opportunities with the Raiders this year, 64 targets, 12 touchdowns. They basically had, I know there's a narrative overall in football in general, but you want to use a running back to the last brim on their rookie contract. That is what the Raiders did with Jacobs this year. They made him their workhorse. They basically just DeMarco Murray this guy this year. That's what happened. And again, you kind of mentioned it, but if I knew he was returning to the Raiders, I'd have no issue, maybe ranking him higher, because he did show he has that elite 20 plus PPR point per game ceiling this year. But the only thing is, there's ambiguity in the situation. He's more volatile than Bax's range. He's not going to outrank a guy like CMC or Barkley, but he doesn't have the contract stability of these young guys. So for now, he's got to be at running back 9, running back 10. Actually, the next guy I actually have ranked ahead of him, because of that contract status that he has compared to what Jacobs has. But if Jacobs does come back to the Raiders, maybe franchise tag, maybe, a short little like 2-year contract, 3-year contract, whatever, I have no problem, maybe even ranking him a tiny bit higher.
Yeah, it's tough because he's still only 25, right? He's barely 25 right now. I think his birthday is like this week or something like that. So the guy's still very young, despite the fact that it seems like he's been in the NFL forever. He's literally the same age as the next guy that we're going to talk about in a second. So that's encouraging. But the other side of it is like, is he ever going to get a 400 opportunity workload, which is what it took for him to finally reach this ceiling? Because before this year, he was, a top 15, a top 12 running back in good situations. But this year, he really took that step forward. So Jacobs, again, another guy that I want to see kind of what happens throughout the offseason before I decide to buy on him. If you wanted to buy on him 110% of the value, just knowing that certainty that he's back with the Raiders, he's going to get a full workload, I'd rather just do that than buy him now, and anything could happen, right? He could go to a backfield committee. He could, not get signed until August. Like, we have no idea like what would happen with Josh Jacobs. And Rhamondre Stevenson was the guy I was referring to, who's the RB10 for us, RB4 of the win now running backs bucket. Win now running back who's in his 3rd year, by the way. So he was an older prospect coming out. So he's not the youngest guy in the world. He's in the same draft class, as some of these other guys that we talked about with Etienne and with Najee Harris and stuff. And even those guys who are older prospects, this guy's like 2.5 years older than Javonte Williams, who was in the same draft class as him. I really love Rhamondre Stevenson for like in the short term, what he can present in theory, because Damian Harris is a free agent. And it looks like, Kevin Harris and Pierre Strong, who they drafted in the draft last year, was kind of like preemptive moves to just let Damian Harris walk and complement Rhamondre Stevenson. But we do have, a 25-year-old year 3 running back with a big workload who just commanded 90 targets. But again, this is a great free agent class. Who's to say that they don't retain Damian Harris or they bring in someone even better than Damian Harris, and a great running back draft class. And this is a running back with 4th round draft capital. So we don't know if he's going to be the same exact guy that he was this year. At the price he was coming into this season, it was worth that risk. But now he's not at that price anymore. He's valued among the better dynasty running backs that there is. And if he clears all of those hurdles, no free agent running backs, no draft capital running backs, then he could definitely be a top 5 to 8 dynasty running back this time in August. But there's so much that he has to overcome to get to that point.
Yeah, I mean, taking him in a startup right now is a risk, in my opinion. Again, him and Jacobs kind of, 2 peas in a pod is kind of how I describe this little mini tier between them, in the sense that they represent such a similar thing. But we know if things work out right, it's going to pay off into a top, 6, 7 type of running back. But if things don't, there's a lot of volatility in their situations. They could lose some market value. So yeah, I love Rhamondre Stevenson. Very, very talented, 3-down capabilities, big, tone setter between the tackles. Like, yeah, he's a really good running back. But the thing is that, like you kind of said, Kevin Harris, Pierre Strong, like there's still names that they drafted last year, similar to what it was like with Rhamondre Stevenson when he was drafted to spell Damian Harris. So we don't quite know what exactly Belichick's plan is. We don't know what the Patriots' plan is. Are they going to use them in the capacity that they did this year? Or are they going to say, maybe Pierre Strong or Kevin Harris can take some of the 3rd down snaps? Who knows?
Yeah, it was an easy risk to take as an 8th to 9th round redraft pick, probably 10th plus round startup pick that you were getting him this time last year. But you don't want to pay for last year's production if things can change, which I think things can definitely do. I think the Patriots offense could get better. I think they could add talent at wide receiver. And like I said, this could be a top 5 to 8, redraft pick if potentially that like if we have Rhamondre Stevenson alone in this backfield and they say, nothing, Kevin Harris, Pierre Strong, it's going to be Rhamondre's backfield, and they add a Jordan Addison in the draft, they add a free agent wide receiver or something like that, and this offense looks like it could be much better with Mac Jones in his 3rd season, then Rhamondre's, you're probably going to be happy that you held on to him, but there's so much that can go wrong in between there. Like you said, very risky situation. So the final 2 guys that we have here, we'll probably speed through as quick as we can because they're very similar situations. They're both older running backs. They're win now guys. Austin Ekeler, first guy that we're going to talk about, RB5 of the win now bucket. He was the RB1 in redraft this year. But I'll let you take it away because we did talk about him on our Dynasty Sells video.
Well, yeah, I talked about him on the Dynasty Sells video recently. I mean, you guys know the negatives that we find with Austin Ekeler. He's old. He's got depreciability on the market. As soon as you make that pick in a startup and you take him, round 4 of your startup, he's at minimum going at least down a round by next year, even if everything works out right. So there's no inherent upside in terms of market value of making the pick. He's going down no matter what. If he, is the RB1 or RB2 next year, probably only down a round. But if he's like the RB8, he's probably a round 6, round 7 pick this time next year, right? However, if you do have Austin Ekeler, if you're a competing team, your startups, a few years already down the line, and you're like a top 3 team in your league, he does have a significant amount of value in terms of the production he can give to your team. If you're a top contender, Austin Ekeler is one of those few assets in fantasy capable of winning you leagues. PPR machine, tied to a great offense, an elite quarterback in town, will probably be ranked as a top 4-ish type of pick going into 2023 fantasy draft. So I do think, if you have him, he will be very good next year. And I do think he deserves a spot in these top 12 of our dynasty rankings. But if you do have him, I'm absolutely looking to transition, whether it's, maybe getting another old running back plus a 2nd round pick. Maybe it's cashing in on 1st round equity. Maybe it's, adding, Austin Ekeler in a 2nd to try to see if, the Jonathan Taylor owner wants to sell. Who knows? There's a lot of opportunities that you can do with Ekeler to either upgrade to a younger running back or to cash out on your draft capital that I just simply have to take right now because I know the opportunity cost of waiting could result in like 50% of his market value going out of the window.
Yeah, and the perfect example of that is Alvin Kamara, right? Like,
yes.
Even though Alvin Kamara had the suspension concerns, like most people would have assumed entering the year, us included, we had him rated as a 1st round redraft pick. If Alvin Kamara stayed healthy, he'd probably be a top 5 running back. And that did not happen. And Alvin Kamara wasn't terrible. He had some good games here and there. But if that happens to Austin Ekeler, he's going to absolutely crater in value and probably be like an 8th round startup pick as a he's almost 28 now. Like, he's going to be almost 29 entering the season. Like, he's an older running back, and that comes with a lot of risk, man. We've seen a lot of these dudes start to fall off around that age range, and Nick Chubb is no different, who's our RB12, who's the RB6 of the win now running backs bucket. I don't want to rank Nick Chubb this high at all, to be honest. I never thought I'd have him this high. I don't think he has a ton of value insulation. He's 27 years old. He's going to be damn near 28 when the season starts come September, with over 1,300 career touches, 1,200 of those carries under his belt. So we got a dude with a lot of risk to regress as a player, which we saw from guys like Dalvin Cook, Ezekiel Elliott in recent years, and he hasn't regressed yet. And if I expect Watson to be the great quarterback that he is, I have to be in on Chubb to some degree, because he should have a lot of touchdown upside, which is why I have Chubb this high, and also due to the fact that he's just a great player. But this is more a product of the running back position being bad than it is Chubb being a great asset that I want to invest into. There's probably 25, 30 receivers that I would rather draft over a guy like Nick Chubb, probably 15, 20 quarterbacks almost too.
Over under Bush, by the time the NFL draft is done, Nick Chubb is in your top 15 of running backs.
I don't know. It's hard to say, man. It's going to depend on where Tucker and Gibbs and Charbonnet and all these guys go in the actual NFL draft, because I would much rather, like, if you have the opportunity to take Nick Chubb and sell him for a mid-first round pick right now, re-roll him into, one of these, talented rookie running backs, you're just definitely going to do it, because even if those talented rookie running backs don't have the talent that Nick Chubb has, and it's very unlikely that they do, their market value will definitely be higher than Nick Chubb's. And it's possible that you get a guy, if Zach Charbonnet goes to a great offense and he's this great, 3-down back, he can ascend miles beyond where Nick Chubb could ever ascend. If Nick Chubb has an RB1 overall season next year, he leads the league in touchdowns, 20 touchdowns. Deshaun Watson looks like Watson. How high is Nick Chubb going in startups? RB5, RB6? And again, we'd probably be telling you to sell again this time next year.
I don't even think it would be that high. Look at Derrick Henry's market value.
Yeah, I mean, like, Christian McCaffrey is the perfect example. Like an elite running back. Austin Ekeler was the RB1 in fantasy this year, and he's like our RB11 in our rankings and consensus, like RB7 or 8 on the market. So there's not very much value that you can get out of these running backs, which is why we would rather just, offload them for draft picks, re-roll them into rookies, and align your winning windows that way. Because the best production that you're going to get out of the running back position, where you're not losing value year over year, is when they're on their rookie contract. And if you do your homework in the rookie drafts and, follow channels like ours and stuff like that, look into the numbers yourself, watch the tape yourself, you're going to know which running back prospects are worth a damn and which ones aren't. And it's way easier for you to just hit on running back draft picks, because it's an opportunity-based position, than it is for you to, hold risky veterans for multiple years past when you should.
Yep. No, I absolutely agree. Nick Chubb, he's a very, very volatile player. He's not somebody I want to be drafting. Heck, as you guys know, he's not somebody I even want to be rostering. So not a lot of long-term value. Don't really know if his production is worth, holding. But either way, if you guys enjoyed, make sure you leave a like down below. Comment your favorite running back buy that you want to get in Dynasty right now. And of course, subscribe to the channel. On the road to 20,000 subscribers, as always. Appreciate you guys for that continued support. But until then, see you tomorrow. We'll be dropping our tight end rankings. So make sure you stay tuned with those notifications turned on. Till then, take care.
Why you need the money?